Hi, AP CSP students. Here is the lesson that we did on libraries and API. And in case you missed it, this is why you're watching this video. So our guiding thought for all of these library and API things is, have you ever wanted to share some of your code with a friend so they can use it to add a cool feature in their own program? Or maybe you've got a collection of functions in one program that you want to use in another program. How can we easily share functions between programs? And you're going to find out the answer to that question is a library. But we're first going to go back to the previous group of lessons where we talked about these function envelopes, where we have this function called make cake, and it takes a few parameters, tiers, and flavor. You also saw cake cost that has two parameters, tiers, and flavor. Then we saw average cake, which has a parameter cake list. And for the library, we're going to think of putting these all together. In code.org, they use the image of a folder. And now they're in a library. So we name it, in this case, Cake Baker. This is a library, a collection of functions that can be used in many different programs. A library should have documentation for all the included functions. You can see the functions here and the documentation in the top of the folder. This documentation should include how each function works, a complete list of the parameters, and what, if anything, will be returned. You'll see that code.org consistently uses this formatting. The name of the function, a little description of what it does. Then it lists out the parameters, and for each parameter, it in curly braces puts the data type of that parameter. Then finally, if there are any return values, it put those at the end of the documentation for that function. So a detailed type of documentation is also known as an application program interface, or an API. APIs are specifications for how the functions in a library behave and can be used. So thinking about what potential problems could come up if I tried to use a function without knowing what it does or how to interact with it, right? Look at this average cake function. This would be similar to looking at the front of a function envelope and having to guess, what does the function do? What is this data type of the parameter? Is anything returned? So now we see an example of a function that you could have built earlier, knowing what you know about parameters. And here is the puzzle. My friend wants to use my find smallest function in her program. Is this function ready to be shared in a library? Why or why not? So watch out for these global variables. If a function accesses or updates a variable elsewhere in your program, that function should not be shared as is. It is not ready for a library. So you thought with a partner, students in class thought about, well, how could we rewrite the function so it could be shared in a library? And the hint here is, could we somehow use a return value that would return the smallest? Now, before I show you the updated code that is fit for a library, we're going to review a few things to keep in mind as you build out functions for libraries. Before adding a function to a library, check for any use of a global variable within the function. If there is, rework the function using local variables and a return. Check if another function is called in this function. If so, both functions should be included in the library. And you need to write the documentation for the function. So here we go, back to that finding smallest function. So now my function is almost ready to be shared in a library. Students were directed to, with a partner, write the API for this function. Think about how the function works, all the parameters, their data types, and a short description of each, and what, if anything, will be returned. So maybe you came up with something like this. The function is called find smallest. Given two numbers, it finds the smallest. It takes two parameters, num1 and num2, which are both data type number. Those are considered the first number and the second number. And it returns a data type number, which is the smaller of the two numbers. So a library needs a name, and we're going to follow these rules. We're going to have no spaces in our name, and we're going to capitalize the first letter. Now, prior to this, we've been using a lot of camel case for our variables, for our function names, and now for our libraries, we're going to capitalize the first letter. The library can now be shared with others. They can use the functions within their own programs as long as they follow the rules set forth by the documentation. Let's look at how you would actually access the functions in a library. So you've actually seen libraries before. The math library is built into App Lab. So what we do is we start with the name of the library. You can see the first letter is capitalized, then a period, then the name of the function, and inside parentheses, if there's any parameters, you put in values for those parameters when you call it. So to wrap up, we've now learned about libraries. Libraries are a group of functions that may be used in creating new programs. An API is Application Program Interface, specifications for how functions in a library behave and can be used.